Hi, everyone, and it's nice to see all of you. I would like to welcome you to James Anderson's defense of his highly original capstone, The Quantum Publics Theory, a theoretical framework for crisis communications management. And it is my honor to have the position, or should I say superposition, of being the chair of this meeting. The way this works, and I'm sure all of you know this, is James has 25 minutes to do his defense, and then we have two rounds of questions, one with James's supervisor, Dr. Alex Sévigny, and then with his second reader, Dr. Terry Flynn. And then if there's any time, we'll open the floor to questions. After that, we send you off to a breakout room. And this is the 216th capstone defense, which is quite remarkable. And I know a lot of you on the call will be defending in the next little while, so that's really great to see. So James, if you are ready, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so very much. This capstone introduces quantum publics theory, a framework for understanding why modern crisis publics behave in ways that classical models struggle to predict or explain. There's a lot to unpack in only 25 minutes, so I'm going to jump right in, because if I don't deliver this package on time, FedEx is going to have an awkward chat with me on Monday. I'm going to begin a little differently and briefly get personal. It's because it's important to understand both what I built here and how. I entered the MCM program looking for theory, the scholarly architecture behind the field I've practiced for over 20 years. I engaged deeply with SCCT, image repair theory, discourse renewals, and others. But along that, I brought 2 decades of crisis communications experience. And what I kept encountering was a consistent friction. The frameworks were valuable, but they didn't fully capture what I was seeing in practice. Specifically, public reactions to modern crises felt more volatile, more contradictory, and more interconnected than these models were designed to explain. That's not a critique of the frameworks. It's a recognition of their boundaries. Quantum publics theory emerged at that intersection, where practice exposed gaps and theory gave me the tools to take those gaps seriously. Across my MCM journey, I work closely with the 3 aforementioned frameworks. Each are core to my daily routine. They are highly valuable, but each is built on specific assumptions. SCCT assumes rational attribution, IRT assumes a relatively unified public, and DOR assumes a coherent audience capable of engaging with renewal narratives. These are not flaws. They reflect the environments these models were designed for. Where I struggled as a practitioner is that contemporary publics don't always behave this way. The way I experienced crises were different. Publics can be simultaneously loyal and outraged. They are interconnected. The responses to one group reshape others. And uncertainty isn't temporary, it's structural. These are not edge cases. I contend they're normal conditions, especially in the age of social media. Quantum publics theory is not a critique of these frameworks. Again, it's an extension. It expands crisis communication theory into conditions these models were not built to address. That extension is what this capstone develops and tests. My thesis has 2 parts, an opportunity and a proposal. The opportunity is this. Existing frameworks struggle to explain today's crisis publics, emotionally volatile, identity fragmented, and networked in ways that amplify complexity. As I just stated and will repeat a few times this morning, classical frameworks remain strong, empirically grounded models. But they were built for a communications environment that no longer fully reflects our evolving understanding of people experiencing various states of crises. The proposal is quantum publics theory. Quantum publics theory reconceptualized publics as probabilistic, entangled systems where behavior emerges through interaction. In this model, communication is not just a transmission, it's measurement. It reveals and reshapes the public system at the same time. Quantum public theory contributes at 3 levels. Conceptually, it introduces new vocabulary. Methodologically, it enables structured AI-assisted qualitative analysis, and practically, it opens the door to probabilistic crisis sensing. Before advancing quantum publics theory, I want to situate it in the literature because it did not emerge in isolation. The review begins with what I think is the core crisis communication canon. Along with SCCT, image repair theory, discourse renewal, I also want to include stealing thunder. frameworks and strategies I've studied and applied in practice. From there, I expanded deliberately. Rhetorical arena theory, integrated crisis mapping, situational theory of publics, and even the excellence theory. This was not selective review. It was designed to be comprehensive. The timing of recent work, particularly Franz and Coombs and Jansen's latest crisis communications primer, was valuable in ensuring the framework was grounded in the most recent scholarship. What the literature ultimately confirmed is this: these models are productive but bounded, and those boundaries are where the theoretical opening for quantum public theory begins. Across classical frameworks, there is a shared structural logic about how publics behave. First, binary evaluation. Publics are expected to move towards support or opposition, and strategy aims to shift that position. Second, linear response logic. Better messaging leads to better outcomes in roughly proportional way. Third, deterministic publics. Organizations can identify, segment, and anticipate how publics will respond. These assumptions are not wrong. They've been highly productive and still work in many contexts. But they come limiting when publics are emotionally mixed, networked, or dynamically reacting in communication in real time. In those conditions, publics are not stable and responses are not linear. And more recent research begins to complicate the classical picture in three key areas. First, emotion. Integrated crisis mapping centers emotions as a primary driver, and Coombs and Tekova extend SCCT by showing how moral outrage reshapes public evaluation. Second, identity conflict. John challenges the idea of stable snapshot attribution, while Wang shows that ideology, power, and identity actively shape how crises are interpreted. Third, network amplification. Work by both Kerber and De Bruyne demonstrate that crises can now be socio-technical, shaped by algorithms, memes, and peer discourse, often beyond organizational control. These streams do not replace classical frameworks, but they clearly signal that additional theoretical infrastructure is needed. The literature converges on a clear finding. Classical frameworks are too static, too linear, and too idealized to fully capture modern crises. From that, three specific gaps in the literature emerge. First, static publics. Classical models assume stable categories, but in reality, publics form, dissolve, and reassemble around emotional and network triggers. Second, linear measurement logic. Communication is treated as transmission, but in practice, it actively reshapes which public's orientations become visible and dominant. Third, missing entanglement. Segmented models can't explain how stabilizing one public can destabilize another. The system is coupled, not isolated. Across the social sciences, theory often advances through productive metaphor boring. For example, Goffman reframed meaning through a theatrical metaphor. Quantum cognition extended this by applying probabilistic models to human judgment. Even in the study of communication, James Greening himself, among others, used system theory to reframe organizations as open adaptive systems shaped by environment and feedback. The standard isn't literal equivalence. It's whether the metaphor provides explanatory power. That's how quantum mechanics is used here, not as physics, but as a conceptual toolkit focused on context dependence, probabilistic states, and the idea that observation shapes outcomes. Those are precisely the conditions we see in modern crises. I want to address a current concern the panel may already have, likely Dr. Flynn. Quantum metaphors can be criticized for overreach, unfalsified claims wrapped in physics language. Quantum public theory takes that seriously. That's why the guardrails are explicit. Quantum public theory borrows structured logic only, context-dependent, simultaneous states, relational coupling, and observer effects. These are analytical tools, not ontological claims. Quantum public theory explicitly rejects the idea that publics are quantum systems or that physics literally explains communication. The validation is simple: interpretive utility and empirical fit. Does quantum public theory explain dynamics that classical frameworks miss? That's the only test, and it's consistent with how quantum cognition and quantum probability have been validated in adjacent fields. Now, quantum public theory introduces 6 constructs as diagnostic vocabulary for dynamic classical frameworks struggle to name. Probability. Publics are partially indeterminate until interaction occurs. Duality. Publics exist as both expressive fields and action-oriented formations. Classical models tend to privilege action and overlook the expressive wave, especially on social media. Identity superposition. Publics can hold conflicting orientations simultaneously, like both being loyal and outraged. Public entanglement. Stabilizing one public can destabilize another. That's relational coupling, not message failure. Uncertainty dynamics. Uncertainty is structural. More precise messaging redistributes it. It doesn't eliminate it. And finally, communication is measurement, the central claim. Communication doesn't just describe public states, it actively shapes what becomes visible and salient. Two methodological claims anchor this study. First, analytic logic. This is a theory-driven, primarily deductive design. Quantum public theory's constructs were pre-specified and applied consistently across the data. Limited abductive refinement was allowed where patterns emerge, but the deductive structure held. Second, data triangulation. The study draws on three independent sources: Reddit discourse, capturing real-time public meaning making, media and web sources, capturing institutional framing, and scholarly literature, providing theoretical context. These are distinct in producer, perspective, and capture method, but all converge on the same crisis events. The crisis design follows Yin's multiple case replication logic. These cases are not meant to be representative of the general public. They were selected because they surface the limits of classical frameworks that make quantum public theory constructs observable. Across all three, we see the same conditions: high visibility, emotional polarization, rapid identity shifts, and cross-public entanglement, precisely where models like SCCT, IRT, and DOR begin to strain. At the same time, the cases vary by domain: a cultural event, a consumer brand crisis, and a socio-political movement. That variation supports analytic generalization. Methodologically, the approach is primarily deductive with consistent application of QPT constructs. Bounded abductive refinement was used, as stated, only when necessarily and tightly controlled. The goal is not predictive or statistical generalization. It's an analytic generalization, demonstrating that quantum public theory is a coherent and transferable framework under conditions of complexity. Before moving forward, I'll briefly introduce three cases and offer a quick caveat. Each case has a detailed timeline documented in the appendices of my capstone. I won't cover that depth here, so if I reference specific moments, I'm happy to clarify in the question and answer session. First, Astronomer, a cultural reputational crisis. A CEO and HR executive were captured on a kiss cam at a Coldplay concert. That clip went viral, drove rapid meme circulation, and both executives resigned. I wanted to explore if this case would demonstrate measurement, a single moment reclassifying the organization. Second, Bud Light, a consumer brand crisis. A promotion with Dylan Mulvaney triggered backlash, sustained boycott behavior, and measurable market loss. This case, I hoped, would illustrate entanglement. Stabilizing one public destabilized another. And third, the Freedom Convoy, a socio-political crisis. What began as a protest evolved into a national disruption, culminating in the Emergency Measures Act being invoked. This was the most complex case in my study, in my capstone, and I was hoping it would illustrate my concepts of superposition. Reddit was selected as the primary data set for three methodological reasons aligned with quantum public theory. And the use of Reddit found strong support in the literature review for the following reasons. First, text richness. Reddit's long-form discussions allow for fine-grained recoding, emotion, rhetoric, identity, entanglement at a level not possible on character-limited platforms. Second, structured interaction. Subreddits and thread replies make it possible to observe how meaning evolves through escalation, counter-response, and cross-community dynamics. Third, pseudonymity. Reddit allowed observation of express orientations without revealing user identities. So the coding focused on what is said, not on who is assumed to be saying it. The data set included nearly 40,000 Reddit entries across three cases, spanning 45 to 65 subreddits per case, collected and coded between September and December 2025. I expect the methodology to be a major focus in the Q&A, and I welcome that. I work closely with Dr. Sévigny throughout, and the full process, prompts, quality assurance decisions, and limitations is fully documented. At a high level, the approach was rigorous, transparent, and replicable. And critically, the data set is large and diverse enough to meaningfully test quantum public theory's constructs empirically. The data set didn't code itself. It's the schema behind it. New indices were developed specifically for this study. Quantum public theory is not just conceptual, it's operationalized mathematically at the comment level across 40,000 units, roughly 40,000 units. For duality, particle and wave variables combine into a duality index, capturing expressive versus action-oriented tension. This extends into class energy and latency, so I can analyze not just orientation, but distribution, intensity, and system activity. For identity superposition, 5 orientations were scored per comment: loyalty, outrage, ambivalence, indifference, and mocking. From there, I derived dominant state and entropy, formally capturing simultaneous conflicting positions. For entanglement, indices were computed from duality, entropy, intensity, producing both structural coupling and amplification potential. All data was structured and analyzed in Excel, including cleaning and pivot-based aggregation. One limitation: uncertainty dynamics were theorized but not modeled, and that is a clear direction for future research. I want to address the use of AI directly. ChatGPT 5 Pro was not used as an autonomous interpreter. It functioned as an analytic infrastructure, executing a schema I designed, governed, and audited. That distinction is critical. There are 3 justifications. First, consistency. Coding roughly 40,000 qualitative entries introduces high risk of human drift. AI-enabled rule-based consistency across the full dataset. Second, scale. Quantum public theory requires multidimensional scoring per comment, duality, superposition, and entanglement. That level of complexity is not feasible to execute manually at the scale and pace needed to complete this capstone in the time that I did. Third, reproducibility. Every prompt defined variables, rules, edge cases, and outputs, and are all fully documented in the appendices of my capstone. The AI executed under my oversight, and I audited the outputs. I expect questions on this, and I welcome them. Over 14 months, I developed a disciplined AI coding environment. To my knowledge, this is the first documented use of AI as an assisted analytic instrument in developing a crisis communications theory. In doing so, I did not chase the perfect prompt. I constructed architecture, and 6 elements define that architecture. First, define variables, each with explicit operational criteria. Second, rationale requirements. Every row returned with reasoning for audibility. Third, edge case rules. Ambiguities were pre-resolved in the prompts. Fourth, schema stability. Prompts refresh regularly to mitigate drift. Fifth, quality control. Full manual review with roughly 20% overrides documented case by case. Sixth, transparency. All prompt versions are included in the appendices of my capstone for replication. The contribution here is not just scale, it's discipline, reproducible, qualitative coding under theoretical control. I want to be upfront with the panel on the matter of ethics and limitations associated with my capstone. On ethics, data was strictly public Reddit content, no private access, no re-identification. Coding focused on expressive discourse, not inferred identity. AI operated under my oversight and executed the schema, not interpret independently. On limitations, there's 5 to note. Platform specificity, sorry. Reddit is not representative of the general public. No visual capture. Memes coded indirectly. Single coder design, no intercoder testing. Potential bot activity, were estimated but not filtered. And uncertainty dynamics were theorized, not modeled. Those don't undermine the contribution, but they define the scope. Now on to the research questions. Research question 1 asks whether quantum concepts provide better explanatory power for modern crisis publics. Classical models assume stability and rationality, but in practice, publics are volatile, contradictory, and networked. People can be both loyal and critical at the same time. RQ1 tests whether concepts like duality, superposition, entanglement, and uncertainty better explain those dynamics. The claim is not literal. It's about explanatory values the right column illustrates. And the key shift is this. Communication is not just transmission, it's measurement, shaping the system it observes. Research question 1 establishes the rationale for metaphor based on quantum mechanics. Research 2 asks, how can quantum public theory be formalized as a theory of public behavior in crisis communications? It begins with duality. Discourse is separated into particle states, action, coordination, and wave states, expression, and emotion. These are converted into proportional shares, avoiding binary classification. From there, the duality index places each unit on a continuous spectrum between action and expression. That's a key shift. Classical models force categories. Quantum publics models publics as fluid and continuous. The second component is identity superposition. This is the identity layer. Rather than assigning a single identity, quantum public theory allows multiple orientations, loyal, outrage, ambivalent, indifferent, or mocking, to coexist within one unit. Each is scored without forcing a full total, preserving uncertainty. From that, I derive a dominant state and entropy, which captures how dispersed those identities are. Low entropy means focused directed energy. High entropy means distributed unresolved energy. The final component of RQ2 is entanglement. The entanglement index captures structural coupling, combining manifestation, identity, dispersion, and intensity. Entanglement resonance applies a multiplicative logic. Amplification is highest when all three align and drops if any one weakens. This lets quantum public theory distinguish between coupling as structure and coupling as propagation. It also reframes publics, not as discrete groups, but as interconnected system states. This sets up research question 3, explaining why some crises spread while others contain. Quantum public theory doesn't predict, it provides a more precise way to observe how crisis systems evolve. Research question 3 asks, how and to what extent does quantum public theory provide a more comprehensive and adaptable lens for interpreting public's behavior in emotionally charged or high uncertainty crisis events? Again, let's begin with duality. Duality reveals 3 distinct crisis patterns. Astronomer, a discursive spectacle, high visibility but wave dominant with no transition to action. Bud Light, a shift to action. After the April 17th statement from the CEO distancing the company from the campaign, discourse localizes, energy concentrates, and behavior becomes embedded. Freedom Convoy, the counterintuitive case. Despite real-world protests, discourse remains high dominant, and forcing amplifies expression, not action. So we see 3 patterns: spectacle, mobilization, and sustained contestation. That distinction between visibility, engagement, and action is what quantum public theory captures beyond classical models. In the interest of time, I'll only go through the visualizations quickly, but it should give you the sense of the type of data quantum public theory can contribute to the field with respect to understanding publics in a crisis. A picture paints 1,000 words, and for crisis practitioners, these visuals can help us manage crises more swiftly and thoroughly. This slide visualizes duality for the Astronomer case. The visualizations can be customized to show on a scale of either -1 to 1, 0 to 1, or just be quantitative comments and replies. This is for Bud Light. And here we have the Freedom Convoy express or duality visualizations. The next component of research question 3 is superposition, how multiple orientations exist. Classical models assume publics resolved into stable positions. What we observe instead is simultaneous, often contradictory orientations across the cases. Astronomer, plural but unresolved, orientations remain expressive and then fade. Bud Light, superpositions begins to structure, but some orientations shift to action as entropy collapses. Freedom Convoy, sustained superposition. Orientations remain expressive and entropy increases over time. The key insight is this: contradiction is not noise, it's structure. Publics don't converge, they remain distributed and evolving. That's what quantum public theory captures. Again, the superposition identities can be expressed on a scale of 0 to 1, -1 to 1, or quantity of comments and replies depending on the indices being used. Here is the astronomy case data sets visualized through superposition. Here's the Bud Light visualized. The impact of the CEO statement trying to distance the brand from the campaign in week 3 becomes quite visible. Orientation turned to action, foreshadowing a prolonged boycott. entropy hardened as the system intensity became more evident thereafter. And superposition found in the Freedom Convoy case. Guess which week the Emergency Measure Act was invoked? Entanglement has the most direct practitioner implications, and it explains why well-designed responses fail. Astronomer, weak entanglement, no sustained coupling, so the crisis dissipates quickly. Bud Light, asymmetrical entanglement, loyal and outraged publics co-move in opposition, sustaining the boycott even after intervention. And the Freedom Convoy, high sustained entanglement, opposing orientations remain locked, especially during enforcement, driving continued amplification. The key implication is this: some crises are structurally resistant to resolution. Entanglement makes that visible before, during, and after intervention. An example of the entanglement index for Astronomer, and the fact that the chart is trending up as a flag. A tongue-in-cheek video featuring Gwyneth Paltrow in week 3 could have been a communications disaster had Astronomer produced products that the general public relied upon or cared about. The deltas between the Max State and Bud Light are exciting. You can see correlation map emerge. Plus, the week 2 findings of the resonance data should have been a significant flag to the CEO before his week 3 announcement. Again, the Freedom Convoy shows entanglement between publics in an interesting way, and the evoking of the Emergency Measurement Act was not without risk. Research question 4 examines what quantum public theory reveals about the nature of communication itself, specifically whether it functions as a transmission or as a measurement within crisis systems. Classical models assume transmission, communication reduces uncertainty, and moves publics towards resolution. What we observe across all 3 cases is different. Communication functions as a measurement. It shapes the system. In Astronomer, reframing reduces uncertainty but reactivated debate. In Bud Light, the response clarified position but intensified polarization. And in Freedom Convoy, authority became clear but volatility increased. Across all cases, the pattern is consistent. Uncertainty is reduced in one dimension and amplified in another. So uncertainty is not eliminated, it is redistributed. The implication for practice is this: communicators are not managing clarity, they are managing where uncertainty resides in the system. That shift from transmission to measurement completes the theoretical architecture of quantum public theory. This matrix synthesizes research question 3 and research question 4 into the core claim. Quantum public theory identifies 3 distinct crisis patterns. Astronomer, spectacle, visible but dissipates. Bud Light, localization, shifts to action and embeds behavior. Freedom Convoy, structural resistance, sustained entanglement, and ongoing contestation. The key point is this: these are fundamentally different crisis types. And while the classical frameworks are exceptional at identifying and defining crisis types, they all cannot reliably distinguish them at the level of public system dynamics, including volatility, contradiction, and network. Before I move on to contributions of this capstone, the core insight is this: crises behave like message response events, and less like message response events and more like dynamic public systems where communication reshapes the environment, contradictions coexist, and publics are independent. 4 findings support this. First, engagement does not always mean action. Second, contradiction is structural. Publics hold opposing orientations simultaneously. Third, publics are coupled. Actions towards one group could prefigure another. Fourth, clarity redistributes uncertainty. It does not eliminate it. Together, this challenges how crisis communication is traditionally understood. Quantum public theory contributes at 3 distinct levels. First, conceptual. It provides a vocabulary. Duality, superposition, entanglement, and communication as measurement, naming dynamics classical models don't always capture. Second, methodological. It demonstrates that AI-assisted qualitative analysis can be rigorous when procedurally disciplined. The coding architecture is transparent, replicable, and scalable. Third, practical. It enables new sensing tools. I'm in the process of building a custom GPT, and its performance is already astonishing. Together, these contributions provide a more precise foundation for real-time crisis interpretation. And in closing, I ask the panel to consider crisis publics as probabilistic entangled systems. Communication is not transparent, it's measurement. And in measuring, it reshapes the system. This claim is grounded in just under 40,000 data points, 3 distinct cases, and interpretive theoretical development, and supported by interdisciplinary precedent. Quantum public theory doesn't replace classical frameworks, it extends them into conditions that were designed to address volatility, contradiction, and network independence. 3 next steps followed: modeling uncertainty dynamics, practitioner validation, and real-time sensing tool. That is it, and I welcome your questions. And before I move on, I'd like to stop my share of my screen if I can. And I just want to thank McMaster for truly a life-transforming experience with this MCM journey. And whether I pass or fail this capstone, I'm honored by the people that have joined. Dave, I saw you're on. I shared with you my thoughts on your class. And as far as this panel, Martin, I really want you to know that your lecture at our gala 2 or 3 Februarys ago was transformative for me. It was just, I could not fall asleep that night. Your mastery of AI really sunk in my sense of hope for a future where people could be powered by it. I follow everything you say, and I'm just honored that you're my chair on this. Dr. Sévigny, I really do want to look at you, and I can't ask for a better cheerleader on this. Your hand was steady. You guided me through this. My wife and friends told me something that I didn't quite realize, is that throughout this entire journey and developing this, I felt exposed. I don't like feeling exposed. He never made me feel exposed. Trying something new, you pushed me to do it, and I'm really glad I did. I think just to say that I've developed a theory is as big as an honor of being able to say that I'm among the MCM community. And I would have never have been able to experience that without your steady hand. And Dr. Flynn, I've had you in more classes than anybody else, but it was in our first class I came home and I told my wife, even though we're not that much different in age, I said, that's who I want to be when I grow up. You are the crisis practitioner I try to model myself after. The way that you all represent the program, but your classes are all fascinating. But Terry, you made me really embrace my profession all over again. The theory, the walking through ethics, I think is my most favorite class. What a fantastic thing. I really love 7-Eleven. I love the crisis communication course, of course. But I'm glad you're the second reader on this, because I'm looking forward to you poking holes in what I just did. That's it, folks. I'm done talking.
Okay, great. Thank you, James, really for
Jackie. Jackie just signed off. She's the one who called me and said, this Bud Light case study that I'm on, keep pursuing it. There's something more to this. And then I was actually approaching. I want to thank her for that.
Yeah, really a fascinating and such a well-researched capstone, breaking ground on a number of ways, one with your theory, but also in how you used AI really as a research partner and not to offload work. So I found it really interesting. I had to look up so many concepts when I read through it, but hopefully I'll go through it again and we'll be able to
Martin, I'm
understand
still going to have to look up concepts while I'm taking questions. I understand. It's
That's
complex.
good.
Thank you for
So,
that.
so we're going to have our 2 rounds of questions, starting with Dr. Sévigny. Alex?
Great. So thank you for a really thorough presentation. It's been a pleasure to work with you on this. As Martin suggested, you have really broken new ground and done been a bit of a pioneer in terms of the use of AI in theory building and as a research partner. And I actually thought that might be a good place to start, right? Perhaps you could walk us through the process of like where did you come up with this idea? Because remember when you approached me about it, more than a year ago, right? And then how did you flesh it out? How did it come together in your head? And then how did it come together on paper with the use of AI?
Oh, great question. Thank you for that. And Alex, once again, thank you. I could not have done this without you. I'll say that to you forever and ever, but it was, thank you. I've always had a passion for science. I never did very well in school, but I respected the heck out of that era. A good 60 years where the world changed because people were looking at things differently. And so I read Einstein's books, and I would try, like, it was just one of those things I really wanted to wrap my head on, and I just found it fascinating. The movie Oppenheimer came out, and that's where I was watching it in our first year. I was watching in Christmas breaks, and then the way that they were walking through quantum mechanics, it made me think Capstone. Like there's things that they were describing that, and when I think about it, we're all part of nature, and it just inspired, what we deal with in communications and what we deal in crisis. We're all part of the same nature. So if the vocabulary, and that's all honestly what physicists did, was just provide a vocabulary what they were observing or what they couldn't explain. I don't think I could have done this capstone without AI as well, because there was a ton of testing and learning. I needed to make sure it makes sense. The math components, I really wanted to operationalize the formula into mathematical equations so that they could be properly applied to future sensing tools. My last math class was in grade 10, and I got a 51% only because the teacher didn't want me to come back in his class. So I really needed some AI to refine the math on that. But I was an early embrace. I really embraced AI early on through the MCM program. So I was very comfortable in how I would approach this project. I was concerned about drift. I knew the hallucinations. So I just stayed on top of it. And there was a ton of testing and learning, particularly between August and September, where I kept running batches through and testing. And it wasn't until I developed a thorough architecture where I gave it a constitution, I gave it standard operating procedures, I defined edge cases, and ultimately I presented this under one architecture where I felt confident. But even again, the testing and learning happened. I learned that I could only submit batches of between 50 to 200 rows at a time. It would take 15 minutes to half an hour. They were incredibly long days. My wife's right there. She knows I've been up at 4 in the morning, going to bed at 11 o'clock, just running data sets and still not getting more than 2,000 out a day. But to ensure my own sanity, I made it tell me, how did you justify that score? So in between batches, I had time to read every data, look at what the scoring was, and then read the rationale and determine if it was right or not. So in it, I estimate I marked every time I did an override. And it's about 1/5 of the data set. Where I found some surprises, Alex, was the level of context that the tool was beginning to perform as I was getting deeper in the capstone. For example, and I apologize if this offends anybody, but in the Freedom Convoy, there was two groups: the people that were pro convoy, and there was people that were against the convoy. And any time that a development that would impact the convoy would occur, the latter group would mock them by saying, "But yeah, F Trudeau." The AI was able to pick up on that context, whereas the F Trudeau would normally under edge case would just be like, okay, that's got to be a pro convoy statement. So I was staying very close to that type of nuance, and it did exceptionally well at that. But there were times where I had to start over. I was 4,000 rows into Astronomer, didn't like where I was going, restarted and rebuilt the architecture. So very long response, but really a fascinating part of the journey.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting of your theory in and of itself is really interesting, right? But from a methodological perspective, you came up with a fairly unique way of doing content analysis using an LLM with the constitution model and the way you were doing intercoder reliability and reconciliation, that kind of thing is so very interesting.
Well, you got me at P World in Vancouver. We joined there, and I've got a lot of feedback since that. A lot of people that I gave a presentation to on my approach, they never really thought of it that way. They never really approached using AI in that way. I think people chase the perfect prompt, whereas you got to create the environment. You got to create the architecture.
Yeah. so yeah, and well, actually, I'll go to Terry because we're in the interest of time because we're
Yeah.
no, I'll have a second.
Uh, quantum physics extends time, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to extend time today. Okay, so I have to first off say, congratulations on getting here and to presenting that way. Your paper and your presentation hurts my brain. It is so complex. I wish I had this to read when I was 45, not 60, near 67. It is it's complex.
Yeah.
Because that's what quantum theory is. It's complex. And maybe there are 0.0001% of the population of the world that truly understand quantum theory. And asking communicators to understand that is probably out of the scope of our world to be able to do that.
Yep.
It's interesting your idea about where you watched Oppenheimer and this sort of came to be. My bounds theory had a similar origin, and that was watching the movie about John Nash, who developed equilibrium theory.
Yeah.
And that's exactly where I focused on it. I said, okay, equilibrium. We want to create a state of equilibrium in this field as well. So well done on that. I've taken multiple passes on this paper, and I still don't understand lots of it. So that's time for another. And I have pages of questions. And, in our last one, people were saying, oh, we're worried about his hard questioning. So I'm not going to ask the hard questions here. Well, seemingly hard. No, seemingly hard. But I think I'm going to ask very simple questions, but I think they are very hard.
Okay.
So you talked, and Alex talked about this in terms of AI being, intercoder reliability. And Alex and I just had an issue about how do we prove intercoder reliability in some respects using AI systems, and really, peer review as it is within our profession isn't at this kind of stage. So they're still thinking about human intercoder reliability.
Right.
And you said something that now causes me to pause about AI intercoder reliability.
Human drift?
Human drift. And human, and that's why you actually have two humans or multiple humans coding to try to ensure that we are in fact coding the right thing.
Yeah.
So if you only have one human coding and humans have drift, that drift is actually transferred into the AI system because your instructions to them are as a result of the drift that you have. So AI doesn't correct for that drift. It actually amplifies it.
It's a good point. I think it comes down to managing the risk of drift between AI or human. Because of the complexity of my data sets, because of the complexity of my research and concepts that I wanted to explore, to get a human coder, I needed somebody to have that same level of passion and commitment and time that I had for it. I don't think that was feasible, or it would have been awfully expensive. And the drift that I feared was that I couldn't stay on top of it. And I would just have to accept the data sets as is when I got back and then begin the manual review of all of it. With the AI embedded, I could keep my head over the cyber shoulder, the synthetic shoulder, in real time. And what I think it boils down to anybody doing research, Terry, is your passion for your project, but your passion for the method. I really wanted to ensure that my use of AI was going to be accepted primarily because it's replicable. And if there was any holes, it could be addressed in it. If you look at my appendices, if you look at my architecture, if you look at my standard operating procedure, layers and layers and layers of discipline in terms of this is how you're going to code it, certainly. My biases are embedded in it. But that would still be
So I just push back on that because there's two factors of the scientific process. You talk about one, right? Replicability.
Yeah.
The other part is validity.
Yeah.
And what intercoded reliability is trying to do is to ensure validity, right? And so that's what I'm getting at. Whether or not, in fact, you are what you've found, what you've sought to in fact found. So we won't go on that because again, we'd have to go longer on that.
Yeah.
I want to start the second one about practicality. So I always use my good friend Gary Sheffer when he was CCO of GE. Busy guy, 24/7, right? Has to manage. He managed crises, lots of crises across. You were to come and sort of drop this in his lap. First of all, he would go, I'm an old dog. I don't have time for the old dog to learn new tricks. So in practical terms, what are the three things that he could take away from your capstone that would help him manage crises better?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't just drop this on him. This is paving the way for sense-making tools that will practitioners to bring what I think every war room needs. And the first is data. The data that you could get quickly and more real time than the frameworks aren't going to be able to provide. In my day as a crisis practitioner, I had minutes to jump on something. Sometimes it got a lot longer, but when you go into a boardroom to provide quick visuals, data to visualize what is happening using Reddit as an example, but you could use any source of criterion to say, here's the state of the crisis as we see it right now. And in very plain, simple terms, you could explain it. They're just yapping about this on social media, or no, this is trending towards people actually taking an action, be it a boycott or canceling our services, whatever it might be. You'll have that context ready right off the bat. So that I think is the biggest contribution from a practical standpoint that you could do. The second thing is that you can actually explore when you do say something, how it could actually happen. I'm not trying to be predictive here, but if you take a look at the Bud Light case study, for example, Kid Rock comes out, does a video. There's a bunch of MAGA and conservative people are all upset the use of a transgender influencer. But at that point, it was just still people, according to the case studies, complaining about it online. It got a lot of media attention. There was a lot of people, and yeah, sure, there might have been some instances of people boycotting Bud Light, but most research pointed out boycotts don't last forever. But what the CEO did instead was not know that if he's going to try to appease that group, he ended up alienating groups that are actually coming to Bud Light's defense. And that sense, so the one chart I had with entanglement, you can see how groups move in concert with each other. That's incredible analysis and an insight to have in the midst of a crisis. Because what if we pander these folks, are they going to respond in the opposite direction? Or what other groups might be going with the audiences we're trying to measure against and all that? And then I think the ultimate thing is that, the third thing is going back to probability. We've got to get out of this sense that everything's deterministic. X plus Y doesn't always equal Z. Think in terms of probability. This is what everybody else in a war room in an organization thinks it. And it just brings that step of our profession doing the same thing.
Okay, I'll come back to the next one in the round.
Okay, so for round two, Alex?
Yeah. So, I'm on. Yeah. So, to further Terry's point about applicability, I know you've it's not part of the capstone itself, but when I read through this and worked on this with you, I kept saying that this won't work unless there's a way of providing an interface to it, right?
Yeah.
And getting the data quickly, right? Because if you're going to have this applicability in a crisis, it took you hundreds of hours to do the data analysis for this, right? Yeah. So let's say you're in your let's just say you're in your own function at your employer, right? And something blows up, and you want to apply this theory to the challenge. What does that look like?
So I stated at the end that I have developed and am building a custom GPT that takes the concepts of crisis quantum publics theory and tries to build a tool for practitioners to use. And I've been testing it ad nauseum, so that the end goal would be that I point the tool towards a data set. It reads what's going on. It conceptualizes it using the frameworks, but then quickly spits out a report, a briefing, what name you, that brings us through the crisis that we could go into a war room armed with. I did one here. It was when the NP for Nunavut crossed the floor. And so I did from the perspective of, in the PMO, and there's some angst about this. And within 8 minutes, the tool now can go into a Reddit data set, read it, provide me with data, an overview of the situation, provide me with data that I could bring into a war room, that contextualizes all the visualizations that I have. But most importantly, it provides samples of the data that it read and coded so that I can audit it to make sure that it's right on track.
Well, that was going to be my question, right? Because like it did take you were meticulous in doing that intercoder reliability check. I mean, you reviewed every single line of output in this, which, took you ungodly numbers of hours. But if you're in a crisis, it's going to pull the data and you'll get the readout. Back to like Terry's a question of reliability or validity, right? Like how much faith, like let's say God forbid, let's say something happened at work for you, right? And you're having to do this today, right? How would you feel about the reliability of that without having somebody meticulously go through line by line and reconcile the data?
I think that that the reliability on that in moments of crisis will only begin to improve from where it is today. And when you're in a crisis, Reddit data is going to be all but one forms of input and quantifying the issue before the organization. So I can pull data quickly, but it's going to be one piece of the pie that we're bringing to the war room. But at least if I have the validation sample here, and this report took 8 minutes to produce, and it's got 50 lines of data to use as my sample, and it's pretty darn accurate.
So it would come with a disclaimer, is what you're saying. Like
100%. I would qualify everything.
Right.
In any type of war room. Here's what we think we're looking at.
Okay.
That's
Let me just jump on that because I want to talk about a specific crisis. We're a victim of a crisis, an organization that was a victim, where they had casualties, and there was a great deal of empathy in the public towards that organization because the perpetrator of the crisis showed a complete system failure causing the crisis. And yet, the president of the victimized organization is being called to Parliament Hill because they messed up in delivering the message. How would your system have been able to help them predict, hey, you should, because that would have been caught nowhere. Nowhere was talking before they did that. So it's became the sort of narrative of the crisis that Air Canada needs to spend, should have been in French language. How would that have helped them?
Well, a couple of things, Terry. First of all, not exactly predicting what that message would do, but understanding that the minute that a CEO is going to say something, you're changing the system. So you're looking at right now a moment of empathy for Air Canada, and a lot of blame being spilt elsewhere, right? So I haven't done the data, I haven't looked into it, but it's a really good example. But if that empathy exists, as he said, on Reddit, I think one of the first things that the public theory would pull up is that this is also a Canadian issue. And Canadian is just not an English-only country.
Yeah.
We're a multinational company. So any messaging should have that strategy factored into it. And what the data would only point to is this is a moment for Canada here. So from there, the CEO and his communication strategist should have thought through that particular lens.
Okay, the last point is, so what now? What are you going to do with this?
It's a very good question. I'm not sure if I'm done with this. It has opened up a brand new lens. I find it exciting. And I really think that as AI becomes more interconnected in our profession, in our practice, I really do want to be involved in ensuring that the framework, the outputs, and the approach are ethically bounded and guided, but also reflective of what we need to do as practitioners to do it. So I'm going to keep initially, for sure, working on building out that tool. My wife says I'm bad at names. I call it QTP or QPT, GPT. But again, when I think of ethics and whatnot, I'm moving on from OpenAI. I think I'm going to find a home in Claude, and I got to make sure it works there. But beyond that, I think there's a lot of opportunities where I'm really concerned on providing this level of insight on people is the nefarious activities on this. If somebody could quantify what I've done quickly, think about how this would influence polymarkets, which is already irking me. The risk of exploitation, of manipulating people, using these insights against them. So I don't think I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to think I'm going to be.
So what I would suggest, because I think that you're trying to extend the theory, you need to test the theory in peer-reviewed settings. So I think you need to, in fact, go to things like BLEDCOM, IPRRC, IPR, and present them in front of academics, even the people like Tim Coombs. I think you need to be able to get that feedback because you've developed your own QPT comb that you're in, right? You're in your own bubble here, and you need to sort of get outside of that bubble and to sort of understand what are the next theory steps that way.
Okay.
I think you need to really do that. You missed the 26th season, but I would suggest that you really look at putting yourself out there, and that's the whole point of the scientific process, is that we come up with these ideas, and there's a great opportunity, I think, for this idea, but you have to go and present it and to be open to comments, criticism, suggestions, and revisions going forward that way.
Yeah. And I think you'll see that I am not married to quantum pump theory. I'm married to a better approach.
Yeah. And I'm happy to do that as well with you.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, well, great. Thank you, James. And Terry, thank you for using quantum theory to extend the time. We are now going to put all of you in a breakout room while Alex, Terry, and I discuss and deliberate, and then we'll bring you back with our final comments about James's capstone.
Just putting everybody into a room. It'll give me 30 seconds.
Christina Strode, we're not applying quantum to any of our ethics deadlines. No.
It's fine. Okay, so I'm going to put everybody in a room.